Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome and thank you for joining us in this, I guess it must be the 10th, 11th, 12th, I kind of lost track, presentation that we've done over the past year. It's been really a great adventure launching Trinity Spiritual Center. I'm Mark Grayson, and I'm the founding director of the center. And today, I am especially excited to introduce you to our guest, who's actually been here for a couple weeks, and we've had a number of conversations over the last 2 weeks, and then over the last few days, he's been up in Connecticut, and so there's been an ongoing conversation that I can't wait to actually dive into with all of you. But our guest is Raphael Liogier. He's a French, obviously.
Is that obvious?
Yeah. Professor of philosophy and sociology at Sciences Po X in Aix-en-Provence.
Sciences Po.
Oh, thank you. So my French is terrible.
That's fine. That's fine. It's nice to hear it English way.
And his research interests range widely, as I've discovered over the past few weeks. I think they can be characterized as focused on identity and the way we define ourselves by excluding others. And that big idea plays out in a lot of different domains. He's an expert on Islamophobia, was actually the first person to testify before Parliament after the Charlie Hebdo attack. He is interested in the issues of the dominance-based culture of masculinity that we are now experiencing ever more visibly in the world, and has written a book called The Heart of Maleness.
In English, the English translation is Heart of Maleness, yes. Yeah.
And he's also expert in Buddhism and wrote his dissertation on the misappropriation of Buddhism by the West. So that gives you an idea of the range of the conversations that we've been having over the past few weeks. Today, we're going to focus on a topic that I think is very much on everybody's mind, which is democracy and the state of democracy, both here in the United States and around the world. It just so happens that Raphael has been working for the past 3 years on a major work, a 1,000-page book that's about to be published in France, which illuminates a lot of the issues that we are struggling with today. And it's my understanding that his view is that we very early on kind of went off the rails in living out the promise of the Enlightenment movement, which so shaped the thinking of the founding fathers here in America. And as a result of our inability to sort of live into the ideals and the full promise of the Enlightenment, we are now working through a lot of the fallout. And you're probably wondering, well, how on earth does that actually connect to Trinity Spiritual Center? I think you'll find out as Raphael starts to share his ideas with us, that at the heart of the Enlightenment was actually a set of spiritual principles. And that's the very thing that we have been unable to live into. So with that, I think I might just turn it over to you. Maybe, though, you might want to use the Ukraine as a springboard into the conversation as to how you see what's going on there and what it represents in relationship to the work
Yeah.
that you've been doing?
Yeah, in fact, I mean, you summarized it so well that I feel. When we talk about democracy, usually we talk about procedures and majority of people that have voted for one person or another. We talk about, two political sides that are fighting each other, like the Democrats, Republicans here, and in France, other parties, and elsewhere, something else, and we're very proud of that, and actually are right to be proud of that. But I think we forgot about something we forgot about the actual origin of that. The actual origin of that is, how can I say, some kind of a spiritual bet, but a spiritual promise, as you said, a positive spiritual promise that is deeply enrooted in transcendence. And it's like if it had disappeared and people don't think about that anymore. It's like if they were unable to trust that promise anymore, and I will come back to that. And so because they are unable to trust the promise itself in their everyday life, it's like if they were trying to trust something else, just the effect and not the cause of all that. Just the effect, are we living in democracy? Yes, we're living in democracy, but after a while, when you are talking about democracy, if you don't believe, for instance, if you believe that people, in a way I will say, don't have soul, and they are just, a bunch of organisms, how can you believe that they've actually a clear will, a real responsibility, which is the basis of democracy? If you don't have that, you are trying to believe in something you actually don't really believe. And that's my point. My point is that because we know we can't pretend, we don't believe in what was called in the Enlightenment time subjectivity, even what is called transcendental subjectivity, because subjectivity was supposed to be transcendental. It's an expression that I took right from Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher, who is actually, I would say, like the main, the one that has most systematized the concept of the Enlightenment. And he used this word. Philosophers usually, they describe this expression, transcendental subjectivity, in a very complex way, and you know how they are, how we are, we academics, and just trying to make it something so deep with different, but in fact there is just something very simple. It is that subjectivity is transcendental. That means it's not material. And if it is not material, therefore it's possible to think about democracy as being a process that comes from this bet that subjectivity is transcendental, is not material. And people have will, and they can engage their responsibility. That is the basis, not only of democracy, in fact, or on democracy on a very broad sense, because it's the basis of what is actually the basis of democracy also. It's contract. If you can engage yourself, even in a commercial relation, it's because you suppose that someone has the responsibility that when it is signed, it is signed. We forgot about that. But before the Enlightenment, contract, that existed, but that wasn't at the basis of society. It wasn't that important, And so the 18th century has the reputation to have banished transcendence. My hypothesis is actually that it is not only that it hasn't banished transcendence, but it did the opposite. It emphasized more transcendence than ever. How come? And I'll tell you. It's because when you have one tradition, tradere in Latin, that means transmission. So you just have one transmission of your identity. of what you are supposed to believe, the way you are supposed to behave, even the way you are supposed to dress somehow in a specific social space, let's say France or Britain or somewhere in Europe, because at that time I'm mostly thinking about Europe, of course. In a way, we can say that it's like if transcendence wasn't transcendent enough, wasn't that transcendent, because it has people that are supposed to represent this transcendence. The King of France, for instance. He was king in the name of God, like he was the representative of God on earth, right? And only one tradition. But from the 18th century, there was this idea that if transcendence is what it is, it can't be represented. You know? And if it can't be represented, it doesn't have any political representatives. So if it doesn't have any political representative, but you need politics, you know, that means you need democracy, you know, to change, etc. So in a way, I will say 18th century Enlightenment is more, is more into transcendence than before, because transcendence, the word itself says it, is transcendent. And so with Enlightenment, it became completely transcendent. And nobody has the right to appropriate it, not even a specific tradition. That doesn't mean that traditions are wrong. That just means that from now on, the 18th century, nobody will be allowed, in the name of a specific tradition, to deny the tradition of the other. For what reason? Just because if they actually carry a certain idea of transcendence, they're all right as long as the end words can't be pronounced by anybody. You know, if we come back to the Bible and we say in principio erat verbum, or you know the l'Évangile de John Gospel, it's just in principio erat verbum, but verbum can't be possessed by anybody, so it can't have a political legitimacy. So in fact, modernity is actually based on a deep spiritual root on that. If you don't have that, you don't have anything. So now come back to Ukraine.
Yeah.
Just to say a little sentence. Again, when we are talking about Ukraine today, we are talking about geopolitics, force, relations, who is stronger, how many dead people, what will happen, how much will it cost us, how many lives will it cost us, and how much it will cost to send planes, etc., etc., etc. But I think again, if what is at stake is to protect democracy, and I think it is what is at stake, more than geopolitical, I don't mean bullshit, because it's strategy and all that. That means it's a spiritual thing first that we need to defend. And if we were, and I want to say that even if it is a bit harsh, if we were really believing in what we pretend we have to believe when we are in democracy, we will not be attending, looking to this conflict like if it were outside of us, because basically we're not so bad here. Even in Western Europe. Because what we see, like in a mirror, that obviously it is still possible for some people to really believe in democracy on a spiritual way, not counting what they are going to lose, money, etc., and to defend themselves like being killed for it. I think we were able to do that, and specifically, and it will be my last sentence, specifically in the US. Why? Because in my opinion, the United States of America was the first time where this promise, this transcendent promise of the Enlightenment was actually given a concrete space, something we weren't able to do in Europe. In Europe, we had the idea, we couldn't make it happen whatsoever, even in France with all the republics and all that. But in the US, it was possible. Everything was built on these transcendence, like the was called afterwards the American dreams. The American dreams is just that. It is this, and the basis of, even of intellectually of American philosophy, remember, it's called transcendentalism with someone like Emerson or Henry David Thoreau, and it's all about that. So are we still able to live according to those standards? I doubt it. And that's my main question, my main point.
So if I'm tracking with you, then democracy is, it's almost the physical, political manifestation of the transcendence. It's like, it's almost a mystical experience of how
it is.
This underlying transcendence takes shape and finds form in some kind of demonstration of the collective will of the citizens of this nation. So that was the foundation of this country. Where do you think it went off the rails?
But first of all, I'd like to emphasize on something.
Yeah.
Because when you are talking about the founding of this, I mean, the
Yeah.
basis of this nation, of course, you are at least indirectly referring to the founding fathers. What we must say first, it is they are not perfect people.
Right.
They are not perfect people because that just means they are part of an history. And when you are inside a history, you are inside the weight of this history, of this cultural history. Slavery, la la la. I'm not going to expand the discussion on that. But just to say, what is important here? It is not the fact that they are perfect or not perfect. It is the fact that they believe to something positive to make society evolve, even if they are contradicting themselves with their actions, etc. That's not the problem. The problem is that there is the dynamic, there is the horizon. You say that in English? Horizon, sorry. There is the horizon that they are looking, where they are looking. And so they have this force. Today, I will say, in a way, that's the other way around. Because you can have people that have marvelous actions. And of course, our society now, we could say, in a way, is more free than what it was at the time of the founding father. But that's not that the point. The point is now, is we are not able to have a positive dream, a positive image of our future. Everything, we're always producing negativity, even in the best thing. We may come back to that when we'll talk about ecology and all these kind of things. So we have lost, we could say it in a more prosaic way, the flame, like the dynamic, the thing that makes us advance. And that's worse than anything, I think.
So I felt you were going to make another point, which is actually important to make, and that is that they were, as visionary as they were also flawed men, and you know, unfortunately, the vision that they held did not include women, African Americans, and
it's what
indigenous people, and you know,
it's what I implied, of course. But
yeah. So I think that, you know, I think the opportunity now exists for us to imagine a path forward that leans into the full vision that was driving
Yeah.
and also addresses
Yeah.
some of the mistakes of the past.
Yeah, I'd like maybe to, because I didn't do it yet, there is a different, okay, all that enlightenment, it's what give birth to what we call modernity, our modern world. Usually when we think about modernity like we say it's more modern, meaning it's more recent or something, right? It's not that. Modernity, that means, and even that means that etymologically. Sometimes, as I told my students, the language speaks for himself. You don't even have to, because it's just, modernity, that means multiple modes of thoughts, of living, of believing, of behaving on the same society. But everybody in this society is unified by a certain, this promise of something that is transcendent, that allows us to believe in each other and to accept each other because we all carry this thing, even if we are from different social class, cultural thing, etc. So, what happened? When there was this promise of, say that transcendence is actually really transcendent, it frees people. People were becoming like free, responsible of themselves. Because it was in themselves. They could relate to whatever supreme power, transcendent power was here, but here and in the same times everywhere, So when that happened, it's like if you are in front of total freedom. Paradoxically,
Scary.
it became unbearable. That's my hypothesis. And that's the reason why in the 19th century, you had a complete, at first intellectual, scientific, and on different levels, betrayal of the promise of modernity, which is, in fact, what is in fact even worse than a simple betrayal, it is that this betrayal took the very form of modernity, pretending it is that modernity, And it's interesting because you'll say it's liberty that was given, maybe for the first time in the history of humanity on a social level, was so strange, so difficult to accept that people, some people, and it became dominant, so people invented a new theology. They didn't think so, but they invented a new theology to fight against this freedom and to be a new pure deterministic, pure determinism. It's like, when we were in the ancient traditional theology, where everything is already written, so it's pure determinism. You don't have to feel that you are free or anything. That's fine. In a way, people will think that they don't have to have any responsibility, and in a way, you can't do things, but it's reassuring. But when they didn't have this reassurance, they couldn't come back to the ancient theology because it's not possible anymore. It was like a child reaction when he knows that, how do you say, Father Christmas or something?
Santa Claus.
Santa Claus does not exist. He doesn't accept it, but at the same time he can't come back because it's over now. He is in front of his own, And because he can't come back, there is some kind of a revenge against even his parents that have told him that Santa Claus actually does not exist. And so he invents a new determinism. It becomes materialism. But materialism is not at all what was, proclaimed in the 18th century. And it's exactly what I call, it's the title of the book, The Anguish of the Void. Because our freedom, this kind of transcendence that is shared by everybody, comes with a void, but not a void that is, what can I say? Not a void that is, that will be empty. It's a void because it's the openness of transcendence itself in everybody. But this openness, to recognize it, it's really hard. In a way, it's painful to accept it, to make it something positive, you know? And so because people didn't accept it, they started to want to feel it, which is completely crazy, to feel it, to not see it. And so they filled it with what they, what they saw around them, like material things. And it's when started, step by step, what I call, and in my book I put it in English, because I think it's more well expressed in English, the very concept of success. And America, that was the first part of the world to implement seriously the transcendence of the Enlightenment, was unfortunately the place that was the first one to betray it with the very concept of success that took everything. Because what is success about? Success is fake transcendence. The very definition of success is just that, fake transcendence. Because you need to feel that there is something that you accomplished, but in the same time you are unable to believe in this openness that was given to you with this promise. You inhibit, I can say that, you inhibit your anguish by filling it with money, with things, and you pretend that that has a name, that is some kind of transcendent, that is not only money, that is not only the fact that there are 3 million people that have seen me, on Facebook, or etc., etc. And it will be always a question of, and you will pretend that when you reach a certain level, when it makes a certain impression, you forget that it just comes from numbers and things because it will be depressing, but you say that's success in itself. That's actually interesting because it's also in the US that you have this word, a star. What does that mean when you say a star? This woman is a star, this man is a star, a superstar. Superstar is exactly what we used before, the sky and heaven, to describe what is transcendent. So they became God in our own society, but they became weird gods because somehow they will create some kind of an attraction to become them, because there are this transcendence that is actually not transcendent, but the worst part is for them. That's the reason why they are very suicidal, some of them. It's because they know they are not the stars that they are supposed to be, but they have to keep going behaving like if they behave. That's the problem in our society. We are always in this kind of constraint to pretend we believe in something we're unable to believe anymore. And when we talk about politics today, it's even the big show where everybody is supposed to talk about principles, liberty, freedom, etc., 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 etc. But nothing believes that it actually really, deep inside, it really matters. Because if you want to believe it, you need to be spiritual. And if you're not anymore, that doesn't work. So there's just,
I also think one of the points that you made that's really worth considering is that one of the byproducts of this obsession and deification of success is that we tend to invest godlike properties into people who have huge numbers of things, followers, such that as a society we actually listen to what they have to say even if it isn't really accurate or true. It's like fake news. Yeah. It's like as long as you have the the number of followers.
Yeah.
You can say whatever you
I'll
want.
think about that. Okay, I will take the chance to say a word that is actually kind of a concept that I invented. You know, I'm French, I can't help to put words and things that are, you know, it's just like everybody knows about that, especially American academics and students. They know that the French, they like complex things, and it's true, and it's a problem sometimes. But I think for that, to answer you, I think I could try to use a word that I've kind of invented to describe what I wanted to describe. It's the word qualitatization. Of course, you've seen it's made with quality. And you say, what is a quality? A quality is just directly, it's not complicated. A quality is that can't be quantified. Otherwise, it will be a quantity, right? But what I call qualitatization is to describe our society. Because we are not, and usually when people criticize capitalism, for instance, and I think it's one of the originality of my essay, if there is one that I try to explain. Usually when you criticize capitalism and this society where there is no transcendent, blah, 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 etc., all that, you say everywhere it's quantified. Everything is quantified. And I said, that's not that really the problem. Because for me, that's fine if someone is a billionaire, if he's 10 times a billionaire, I don't care. I'm not, on that aspect, I'm not very French. I'm not in this kind of social, permanent revenge with people, etc. For me, I was even criticized because people thought I was too American. Could you imagine? I mean, yeah. I don't mean that you hide yourself when people say that. And I say bad. I'm kidding. Just kidding, sorry. But I said, for me, that's not a problem. I mean, from the Neolithic time, people were always quantifying. That's fine to quantify because you're a fisherman, you know, but we are close to fishermen villages. Here, we saw some shacks recently, and so you know that you need to quantify because you know that you need to say, I need shoes. There is a guy that makes shoes. So how many fish do you want to have this pair of shoes? I mean, that's talk. I don't know how to say that in English, like when you, yeah, switch. And after we invented, you know, currency, units, that's fine. And even when the units were growing and was not completely, it became something that you wanted to have in itself and not only the product, etc. That's fine because that fluidity of the economy and so quantification, that's fine. Even finance is a great idea. Actually, finance is a transcendent idea. It's the idea that what you can do on your own, you will be able to do it all together. And what is even better, it is the fact that a single person that is unable to imagine a too long future with finance, they can all together imagine something that will go over their own ego. But it became the opposite. Finance today, right? It's just not collective, but it's almost certain amount of people. It's not long term, but it's the opposite. It's short term, you know? So, what I was going to say, yeah. What I was going to say is that our problem, so is not quantification, even when it is a huge number. It is the fact that because we lost track, and in the Neolithic they knew that there was something that was transcendent in their action, for instance, in the way they were behaving and all that. So when they were, trading, they knew they would not trade a quality, that the quality was still there. They had to do it because they had to eat or they had to wear shoes. So they were, they didn't lie to each other about the real meaning of what was actually happening in this exchange, because they knew it was for survival and they did it, etc. Nowadays, that's different because qualitatization, not quantification, means that because we have lost track of transcendence, you follow me? Because we have lost track of transcendence, we need a way, because human beings, they can't live if they don't have this kind of transcendence in a way, even the people that are materialist. So they invent a fake transcendence, but a transcendence that is, how can I say, made out of a kind of quantification, but they have to erase the fact that it comes from quantification. It's what I call qualitatization. So that means somebody is on YouTube, let's say, what we call now, I don't know if it is, you call that in the US the same way, influencer, people that influence because they are like thousands and millions, and so they will earn millions of dollars just the fact that they say, you've got to use this toothpaste, or I do myself, so that's great, and you know, or doing other things, etc. What is interesting, it is not the fact that there is millions of people that watch them. It is the fact that after a certain number of people, you pretend that you forget about the fact that it is just the number of people that make you appreciate the fact that they say what they say. Because you need to do that. It's the same with a star, in the star system, you know? It becomes like that. And this process of qualitatization, it's exactly the worst of finance. Because at the end of the day, it is not to do something positive, it is just the fact that this value was created out of what? Out of the fact that people believe that this value is the value that it is. Yeah. And the more people that believe that this value is the value that it is, because we don't believe in anything else that numbers, it's just the numbers of people that pretend they believe. Who cares if it is actually true or not, because we don't believe there are any truths anywhere. So at the end, that's just this process of qualitatization. Another place where you have that, it's art. And I'm sorry to say, art, it's very interesting to talk about art, because art is actually the very place where transcendence expresses itself through something that is material. So you use a wall and you paint on the wall. The wall is material, but there is something that will be going on, and something that will happen that is not physical. And you will do it with music, you will do it with everything. But now, it's the same with this qualitatization process. Art has become a currency. It's even worse than that, in fact, because I have a little chapter about it. It's even worse than that. At the beginning, art was the currency, like a piece of art were the currency. Now it's not even that. It's the artist itself that becomes the currency on the market. Because who cares what he's doing? He can spit on the thing, it will have the value of the fact that it has the value of the fact that it's his spit. Could you imagine? So that means because we can't avoid transcendence, but we are unable to believe what is actually really transcendence, we are trying to pretend that things are transcendent by doing things, and because we don't know what to do, it's just a question of quantity. Quantity of people that thinks that this piece of art is great. And what is interesting is that now we have even the crossing, if I can say, of pure finance and supposed to be pure art with those, how do you know already, like NFT. That is exactly that. It's incredible because you don't even buy anything. You don't even buy the image. It's even worse because it's not even a bourgeois thing, because you don't buy the exclusive property. You just buy the fact that you buy it. And just the fact that you buy it give the value of the fact that you bought it, and because you can sell it a certain price that is even more than the price that you've bought it, hopefully for you. It's just completely mad. It's just the extreme of qualitatization that expresses a society unable to believe in anything, for that matter, either way.
So Raphael, I think we've probably gone through a lot of your thinking, or some of it, on the dichotomy between what we say we believe and what we do. You know, we've been talking about that a lot. Let's move into a little bit of your thinking on retrotopias.
Oh, ritual utopia.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it's another word, but you like words. You like when I invent those little
Well,
words.
I want to tee you
You
up.
like the French way, but
Because
it's like, I don't know.
No, but really, I think it's really interesting because I think that we are seeing that very much today in lots of quarters in the
Okay.
world, and there was a period when we
yeah.
saw it and we know what the outcome of it is.
To answer your question and to
Yeah.
enter in little details, remember he said it's 1,000 and now 1,200 and some pages, but I don't think I will publish the entire thing in one. But I have to finish. So I have to enter in with another word. Yeah, because if you ask me to say what, I said that there are two big cycles from the 19th century to now. The first cycle is what I call the strategy, the inner strategy to repress the void that is in us. And this strategy to repress the void, to pretend that there is no void, that everything is fine, great, and all that, it's what I call schizophrenia, schizohumanism. So I call that schizohumanism. It's like you pretend that you believe in man, that you believe in that, and you have humanitarian ideas and laws and just full of yourself, basically, about so many things. But in fact, you don't really know, you don't really believe, so you need, when someone does not believe in what he pretends he actually believes, he needs to express more than the other. So he needs to pretend more, to put more shining things. It has to be bigger, more beautiful. If you don't believe in freedom, in liberty, you write it everywhere. So you see, look, I believe in it. It's everywhere. It's there. It's written in gold letters. Gold is very important. Gold letters, you know? So yes, I do. And it's what I call the schizohumanism, and it's the repressed cycle. Right? But at one point, and I think we are reaching this point now, people they are less and less able to trick themselves. Because of course, you need to trick yourself, to pretend that you believe in all that. And so it's repressed in the unconscious. But as you know, when you repress something in the unconscious, it comes back. And so that's the second cycle. And the second cycle is when you look around you and say, oh, everything is fake. Those politicians, I know they don't believe in that, etc. Because you don't even believe in yourself when you say that. And so, of course, you don't believe that they could believe in what they are saying. And so, step by step, you will have a new public discourse that is, everything is bullshit. I don't believe in that. You will have all those plot theories. Of course, it's not, what we think it is, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you'll have the comeback, of the repressed. It's what I call the identitarist cycle. It's because at that time, people feel that something is missing. They don't accept anymore this word, but they don't know how to feel it, because they lost track from the 18th century promise and all the spiritual thing, etc., etc. So they try another way, because they feel, in fact, that everything is lost, that everything is taken from them, and most of all their identity, the fact, let's talk about America, that they have lost their American greatness, might be true somehow, that they have lost something that belonged to them. So maybe that's the immigrants that have taken it. Of course, we see them around. They have taken it. We had it before. How come that we don't have it anymore? These things that we felt before. No, it's sure they have taken it. And look, the rest of the world. The rest of the world is just crap, it's awful, and everything is taken from us. And we don't measure that it's actually a spiritual void that we feel. That what was taken from us, actually, it's us that were unable to feel it with the right transcendence, way to live it with the right freedom, the right liberty. And so, in this time, everything is fake, everything, etc. There is what I called the obsession of authenticity. And it becomes even a politics of authenticity, which is, of course, 2 times fake. It's the highest level of fake. The image of that is Trump. Trump is, people that voted for Trump, most of them, they were in quest of something that was lost. America great again. Something that wasn't here anymore. Even they were looking for their even religious identity with Trump, a great believer in front of the eternal, They were looking for that with this guy. Incredible. And of course, which is even better, because sometimes things are just so incredible in the way they present themselves. The guy that is supposed to represent the highest degree of authenticity is actually an actor that plays the authenticity in front of the American people that believes in that. And of course, I don't blame them, because you've got to believe in something, and so in this period of identitarism, you need to feel with something, and it's at that time that the word you were referring to is coming. You have this word that I haven't invented, this one. It's utopia. Utopia, that means it's in nowhere materially, but it's a positive aspiration to make it happen. That's the reason why I call America the first concrete utopia of the Enlightenment. Because concrete utopia, concrete etymologically, that means to grow with being concrete. With, crete, growth. So it's when you have something, that a concrete utopia is when you decided to grow with each other and to make this dream grow, come true here. So it's a concrete utopia. But now that we are unable to implement the concrete utopia, and we are in the return of the repressed, as I said, so in this identitarist destructive period, which is the last cycle, I forgot to say that it doesn't end well, according at least to what I try to discuss. If it goes right to the end, it's suicidal, so it ends in self-destruction. But what do we make? Because we are not able to make anymore our life with concrete utopia, we make what I call retro-utopia. Utopia of a past, image of a past that has actually never existed, but that is supposed to be our pure identity, like if they were a pure identity, especially in America, And so we are in this idea that because first, schizohumanism, we tried to create transcendence out of success. Identitarism, we don't believe in success anymore, even if we are still in the mechanism of the thing, and we don't like what we have around, but because we are unable to be into this original transcendence, instead, we build retro utopias, like these pure identity that might have existed in a pure past that nobody has ever lived in. That's it.
So, lest we leave everybody in a completely depressed state, let's talk about the path forward so that democracy can once again emerge and we might actually see the fulfillment of the original vision that was expressed. Can we go through
we can do
the
that.
fourth
Yeah,
step?
of course.
Because I think that we might actually even be witnessing some of that coming through in what's going on in the Ukraine now.
I think now that I drew a picture that will look quite sad and depressing, but because I did it in a little bit like a caricature, because a caricature there is some pedagogical virtue in caricature. But I think the dream itself, the promise itself, was never dead, has never been dead. It's still here. And it expresses itself with some kind of aspiration, but an aspiration that is itself repressed by the entire system nowadays. So let's talk about one of the main, what is really at stake in our democracy today. We have three problems. Let's talk about three problems that are, in my opinion, major problems. The problem of economic inequality. It's a humanitarian problem. I'm not talking about economic inequality on this guy is richer and that. It's not that. I'm talking about people that are starving here and people that don't know what to do with their money there, which is different on a global scale. That's a real problem. The second one, and as you will see, they're all related. They feed each other. The other one will be finance, and I described it a little bit. The fact that finance is not what it used to be anymore. It's interesting because finance, etymologically also, etymology, I love etymologies, as you can see. That means faith, etymologically. Finance, it means faith. It's because you believe that you do it. So. But it's the worst part of qualitatization, the faith about nothing, basically, but the faith of just the value of quantity that are actually not supposed to be quantity, but, And the third one is the environment, ecology, like sustainable development and things like that. We know that we have all that is at stake. But if we take one of them, sustainable development, environment, and all that. Everybody knows there is something here. Even Trump, he said that there is something about it. So everybody knows, but in fact, people don't really have the energy to change something, to do something, And in my opinion, if we don't have the energy, and I think we are not going to have the energy, if we don't reconnect with the spiritual root of democracy. What do I mean on a concrete way, on the specific problem?
Yes, because we're Americans.
I know, it's what you told me. You need to be concrete. Watch out.
Practical.
Anyway, so what does that mean, very concretely? That means that right now, let's talk about ecology, we are only able, because we don't have a positive image of ourselves, of our dream, of our aim in life, we are only able to produce negativity about ecology. I give you what I call the 3 layers of negativity that we have now. We are talking, for instance, about the environment. It's the negativity of the facts, of the phenomenons. The phenomenons, can I say that? Phenomenon, And so we'll say, the ice is melting, negative, The water is just running, which is true. That's not the point. And the hole in the ozone is just getting bigger. The pollution, etc., etc. I could go, forever with the list. It's always like negativity, negativity, negativity. I don't deny that it's actually true. That's not the point. It's just negativity. The second layer, what do you propose to do against this negativity? Negative actions. Only negative actions. Prevent yourself from doing that. Don't do that too much. Do that less. Don't grow anymore. It has to be like the opposite of growing economy, etc., etc. Everywhere it's just like restrain yourself. Limit yourself, etc., etc., etc. Second level of negativity, second. And after we'll say, what is left? Oh, there is the moral negativity. The moral negativity is, and if it is like that, it's because it's your fault. So, it will say, it's your fault. Why? Oh, it could be because you are modern. Because you're a capitalist. And maybe worse, because it might be true, because it's partly our fault, but that's not the point here. Because you're human, and you have like deep ecology, what is called deep ecology, where it's just the fact that we are human. And you can see how it feeds the final goal of the last cycle, self-destruction. At the end, it will be the negative dream of destroying ourselves to eliminate even our trace on Earth, because we hate us so much that we finish saying these kind of things. Now, what does that mean? That means that we are suffering. Again, etymologically, what does mean suffering? That means being submitted to something you don't control, that comes to you. A disease is something you don't control, it's not you. So that's really what we say, suffering. When you know in the ancient language, when you say, I should not suffer you, meaning I can't tolerate, that means I don't want to be passive. I want to be active. I don't want you to, infringe on my freedom, right? And the disease infringes on your freedom. And so because we are sick people, on that aspect, psychologically, we are just able to point at problems, to try to solve them, to negatively, by suffering. And what are we proposing to people in ecology and all that? Suffering. So of course, when you propose suffering to a kid, or to human being in general for that matter, they try to, yes, oh, it's awful, but they avoid. They don't do really the thing, because at the end of the day, they think it doesn't change much. After all, that's just like, because they just put negative things. What I propose is to replace that. Not to say that the problems don't exist, that we don't need to restrain ourselves. I'm not saying that. But we need to propose a positive image. So we need to propose, instead of suffering, enjoyment. We need to propose joy. But the problem is that enjoyment, the real enjoyment, I'm not talking about the fake pleasure that is actually a product of negativity and the fact that you don't like yourself, blah, 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 and all that. I'm talking about real positive enjoyment. Again, real positive enjoyment, you can't have it. You can't project it. If you don't believe in yourself, and if you don't believe that there is transcendence in yourself, and you don't believe that the other, etc., 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 you can't do it. So how to project enjoyment? Because at the beginning, that was exactly what was America about. It wasn't what was proposed, to say very concretely. If it was proposed to the people that embarked in the Mayflower and all those in this period, that, there in America, you are going to survive. Maybe you are going to be comfortable. Maybe you, etc. It's not that. They will even accept to not be comfortable. They will even accept to hardly survive your ancestors. As long as that was offered, what I call the desire to be. So that's the reason why you have the first, and I think it's the only one, constitution that is a pure transcendental constitution, because it's actually proposed positive enjoyment. It's the first one that proposed that. So directly saying happiness. So if you don't propose this kind of enjoyment to change the world, who wants to have the desire? It doesn't exist. Human beings don't care when you do that. And it's normal. They need transcendence. Human beings, they always do that. If you don't have that, you are not going to solve any problem. You are going to do what the French philosopher Bruno Latour says. The problem with ecology, it is that at first, it produces a huge anxiety. People say, oh my God, it's going to be that. And second, because people can't stand pure anxiety, they are bored and let's change the channel. And so how to make room for something that is neither this anxiety nor being bored and thinking about something else? Transcendence again, being enjoyment of a positive image or something. And if you have this positive image, that you're not going to be less when you go to America and you were in Europe. You are going to be more than Europeans themselves. Not on a survival, on another point of view. And that makes desire. That makes it desirable. So if we want to change the world, we have to imagine paradise. Something that will not be like, okay, if we try to change the world like sustainable development, maybe we will be able to carry on like that, living a little bit but lower standard, but it will be still okay, so we have to preserve that. That doesn't work like that. Everything has to be given. The dream has to be given in its entirety as something more than great. Otherwise, desire just doesn't work.
So the bottom line is that we need to embrace transcendence and enter the void, and
to accept it,
and watch.
Say that's
what
freedom.
Emerges as we create our.
It's hard. It's just something so unique in the history of humanity that I understand. I mean, I feel that myself. It's really hard. It's really hard to feel that you're responsible, that you're a human being. Sometimes you say, no, I don't believe it, but yes, I have to believe. You know, to relate that to even gender equality and all that, it is the same. If it is really transcendence that is at stake, and freedom, the process is not over. Because at first, the inequality between women and men, it's not a question of transcendence in itself, it's a question of tradition. And tradition is just enrooted in a certain culture that is itself enrooted in complex frustrations and lack of belief. If you really believe in yourself as a man, for instance, you don't need to feel that you submit women to whatever it is. And so it frees yourself as Mark Green will say, of the box.
The man box.
Yeah, the man box.
Are there any questions in the room? We've been talking a lot up here, and I think we should open up the floor to questions.
Oh, wow. You need to speak loud. I don't know why. I don't.
Do we have some time for questions?
We have about 25 minutes left.
Oh, good.
Oh my God, it's an eternity.
Well, there's a lot more to say.
Oh yeah, there are so many things to say, but I mean.
Well, we have a little meeting here between 9 and 10 o'clock in the morning, and I was talking to someone, and I'm getting the feeling that it's a dark thread kind of going through our society right now. And this dark thread is interweaving among us. And one of the things you hit was negativity, and I didn't have that word for something. And the second thing, that it's this thread of fear. It's this thread of fear that goes from this side of the room to the other side of the room. We fear this, we fear that. We had that in Boy, was I glad I came today, because it wasn't in college. So we look at that, and how do we address that, you know? And so I talked to my sister on the way over, and she says, it's one thing to talk about this dark thread. It's another thing now to talk about that void in us, that vacuum that we're trying to fill with all these beliefs and political whatever. But she says, you have to head towards joy. She says, you have to take that concept you have towards joy, and where did you just take me? And I'm sitting there going, you know, so make that transition, discuss a little bit more of that transition of going from that void to the joy, you know, and how do we start that as a movement? You know, what was the phrase that came out in the last few months? It was mass, it was mass formulation psychosis. Mass formulation psychosis. Well, I think psychosis can be positive, can it? Can't we have some, well, psychosis is a denial of this and denial of that, so let's not use the word psychosis. But maybe, don't we need a word like a mass transcendentalism, a movement among us to get away from that hollowness in our hearts? And I leave it to you to try to think about that.
I think the problems of social movements from, let's say, the beginning of the 80s, the end of the 70s and beginning of the 80s, they never addressed the spiritual positive part of the promise of what was. And that's the reason why they were unable, they weren't able to move even a little bit the system itself. They were in these, they were manifesting, for instance, at Wall Street, there was this, but they were always in these negative things like, yes, the ice is melting, but what do you want to put instead? Do you want to put something instead? This society is crap, etc. Yes, but you want to replace it by what? By what do you want to replace it? And I think something that happened and is not understood in its full extent, and that was very concrete, it's what happened in America, for instance, and also in Europe. In Europe a little bit later, in the 70s, what happened in America in the 60s? With all those New Age things, and people were living in communities and doing things, etc. We could despise that from afar. But in fact, it's not what happened to some people, and there were extreme things, completely crazy things at some point, etc. It's not that. It's that the enthusiasm that was there. There was a critics of society with the beat poets and people that they wanted to follow the path of the West in another way, the West being something transcendental again in America, the idea of the West. And so the West is not like geographically located, it's something else. It's geographic, but it's something else. And so they started to, yes, let's walk on, I think about Jack Kerouac, on the road. There is something completely transcendent about that. And people believed in it. There was this energy. But this energy was in fact transformed, used by the system, because it's an energy, like a combustible, like oil for the system itself, to come back to the market. And it's like, the epicenter, the epicenter of this new way to, in fact, carry again the original dream in the 60s, beginning of the 70s in the US. The epicenter was the San Francisco Valley, and it's like if you had this energy, and it just was sliding slowly through what became and was named the Silicon Valley. And so those people that were dreaming somehow a little bit, maybe childishly, but still believing things that were incredible, freedom, that was the idea of freedom, something, they practiced yoga, and it would be like so many things. And step by step, the same people sometimes, they made their startup, and they had the same discourse, even spiritual discourse, but inside the economy of qualitatization, as I said. So they started to pretend they believed in what they used to believe, and again they will come back. And so it's like if they have changed their, sandals, yes, for baskets, to look as cool as they were before, but this time they didn't really believe in it, and then you can see that there is a link. There was this change.
But Raphael, I think you're onto something, and I didn't actually share this in the
Sorry.
introduction. So Raphael grew up, was raised Roman Catholic and identifies as Christian, but is deeply practiced in Tibetan Buddhism and Qigong and Tai Chi. And as we continue to have these conversations, I am struck by the fact that we keep coming back to the void and how scary it is. But the truth of the matter is that it's the mystics, it's the artists, it's the entrepreneurs who are able to actually live in that liminal space and hold open the space where new things can emerge. And I think that some of what you're talking about might actually be aligned with what we understand from these other systems of perceiving reality, that, you know, that the notion of kenosis and the way that you empty things out so that you then create the space where transcendence can emerge and manifest in a way that then moves people forward.
Yes.
And
It's a very interesting question,
Yeah.
what you are raising, because if we had to, this way of being free, with this void that you don't try to feel, but you try to be free with it because it's transcendence itself, it's not something new in itself in the 18th century, because it's actually the very definition of mysticism in every religious tradition. That's the reason why in every religious tradition, the people that are considered as mystics, the political power, and even the political power of the religions, because it was very related at the time, try to eliminate them usually.
Yeah.
Because they represent something that is unbearable just as persons, because basically they don't trust about all those supposed to be expression of the divine, moral expression and all that. They just believe that they are part of this divine and they want to connect. And so that politically, that's just unbearable. So that's the reason why it was secret society most of the time, for instance, Gnostic and people like that. But the originality, the deep originality of the 18th century, we could even say that's the very definition, spiritual definition of the 18th century. It's actually the universalization of mysticism that became a new political force on its own right. So that means that democracy, in the deep meaning, is directly related to the idea of mysticism. There is no democracy without this universal mysticism. But if you lose this part, it's just empty. There is something that is just about procedures, and again, you need to pretend it looks like what you can't believe in because it was all based on that.
Stephen.
One of the things that
You've got a nice projector.
One person's a character.
hey, I paid a lot of money for this voice. I intend to use it. One of the things you've got me thinking about, and thank you, is you mentioned the Founding Fathers and this idea of democracy and this idea of the irony of the fact that we were marching across Native American lands and destroying all of that. And of course, slavery and the original sin of this country, etc. That aside, those people came here as a dangerous act, as out of need, to come here and start over because they were feeling oppressed in various ways. Mm-hmm. And therefore, this dream, this transcendence of democracy, this idea, this concept, if we revisit that, if we can somehow revisit the naivete of that, the freedom, the word you use, free, I mean, when I say free, it opens me. I can feel my chest open up when I say the word free.
Me too.
Yeah, and would that they had done that with some of the people that they marched through when they came here. That's a whole other topic. But I guess all I'm saying is that it's made me think about the original idea of this country and how unique it is.
It is.
And how precious it can be
Well, and
It's
one-
unbelievably precious, I think, really. And I think American people don't realize that enough.
Well, and one of the observations that you made, I have no idea when it was that what's amazing about this country is that you can actually define your own destiny, choose your own destiny. And that is the promise.
Yeah. And for that, but for that, you need to believe there is a destiny, a possibility
Right.
of the destiny. We come back to the problem.
Just because I'm sitting right here next to the microphone. To build on what you just said, Mark, I mean, it seems to me that the sort of the foundational concept was self-determination, right? Freedom, liberty, but we didn't get the, equality and fraternity part built in. And I think that's reflected in some of our history you just mentioned, but and I'm seeing the sort of downside of freedom in the sense of you can't tell me to wear a mask and all that kind of stuff now, and I just wonder, is that part of the problem with democracy?
Yeah.
American democracy.
Yeah, and I mean, it's imprinted in the Constitution and in this pluribus unum. Like, the American people are supposed to live this fraternity. It's at the basis of the idea. Yeah, but like, if we could talk about Hegel, just 1 second. I know it's try to answer you. It's just to try to answer you. There is some kind of a dialectical process, but the dialectical process, as you know, is just you have an aspiration, but there is something that represses this aspiration. It is an obstacle. There is a problem. Problema in Greek means obstacle, actually. So you can't get into it. So you find a way to overcome it, and when you overcome it, right away you see a new horizon from a higher position every time. So every time what actually could have broken you makes you greater and to accept the thing. But he said something strange at first that is interesting. I think Hegel, he said, this process is not some kind of a regular linear process. And it is not only external. It's not like there are people that are poor, people that are rich, and there is like in the Marxist way, when he interpreted Hegel in this way, Karl Marx. It's also an inner process inside people themselves. Because as I said, the founding father, they weren't perfect. And so it was inside them that things were actually playing. That's the first important thing I think we need to keep in mind. So fraternity, it's hard. It's hard fraternity because you need to get rid of all your prejudice. Liberty looks easier. In fact, it's not easy. It's not easy because it can't be detached from fraternity. But people that say liberty, they don't know it. They prefer to think liberty in a very egotistic way, etc., etc. Yeah, but it doesn't exist if others are not free too, So, but it's the problem is like fraternity is something concrete, more concrete than liberty at first, because it's the expression of liberty, but the concrete expression. So it tends to be harder, but doesn't mean that because it's harder, people didn't try to overcome their own difficulties. And there is another little remark of Hegel. I don't know how to translate that. In French, it's la ruse de la raison. It's the trick of reason. The trick of reason, we say. It is just that reason sometimes trick itself to reach its mean. And we could replace reason, because in the 18th century definition, reason could be synonym of the spirit. People, yes, because in Kant, for instance, he distinguished comprehension, entendement, and reason. That is what can be. Reason is not here to grab the world, like to make science. Reason is here to be the guarantee of something that is higher. So it's not rationality, actually. But people tend to mix that because 19th century, they mixed all that to pretend that it is some kind of a linear process with only material progress, which is a contradiction in its own terms, like to say that. And so the trick of reason is like the trick of the spirit that sometimes goes in a way that is not supposed to go to actually reach a name that you will not have reached otherwise. So I think there is also that in history of the United States. Yeah.
I'm thinking of that as being like reason being truth. I'm thinking that that's really what it is.
Maybe with the microphone. Oh no, but you won't ask questions, so maybe there's.
No, I just was following up on what you were saying. That's all. Would you equate reason with truth? Are you saying that reason is truth?
Yeah, there is something related to that. Reason is something that is absolute. So if truth in itself, absolute truth, yes. So reason is something that is always there, like we could say behind the curtain of consciousness.
Would we say purpose maybe in English?
But when we talk about purpose, it's how we would say that it's an expression of reason. Because you can't have purpose if you don't have that. Like if you don't have spirit, you can't have purpose. But it is not that. I will answer in a more like Gnostic, Eckhart, Master Eckhart, way to say, no, it's not that. No, it's not that. No, it's not that. Doesn't mean that it's nothing. It just means that it is too much to be said, which is the opposite.
The via negativa.
Exactly. L'apophatism, the negative theology. Yeah, exactly. Doesn't mean that there is nothing when you say it's not that, it's not that, it's not that. It means it's too big to be named. The opposite, that there is nothing.
If you think you know what it is, you don't know what it is.
Are there other questions?
Yeah, there was.
Daniel.
For our last question.
Okay.
So, first of all, merci beaucoup.
De rien. You're welcome.
This is just wonderful to be in the presence of a real thinker. We seem to lack those.
Thank you.
In the modern United States dialogue, sadly, unless you go looking for them. So it's very nice to hear you. Going back to the notion of being inspired, the age of reason, the founding fathers, moving away from the dictates of a theological society, a theocracy, or one with a king, or where the dictate was singular, as you were saying before, right? There was one stream of command, or a set of directions, if you will, right, for lack of a better phrase. You get a group of people who fight to get away from that. They do it at enormous risk. They jump in boats, they sail 3,000 miles, and it works. And it works because of their desire to have it be different, right, than what they experienced. Jump a little forward, it seems to work. We need invention, so we move into the Industrial Revolution. And it seems to me at that point, we take the inspiration, right, the transcendence, to use your word, and it transcendence, that mystical, unquantifiable quality, and we mechanize it and sell it to everybody so that it's, if you will, pardon my choice of words, but we cheapen the unqualified transcendence. And we package it. And now everybody feels they can easily get it. And when they get it home and they unwrap it, they find out it's not what they thought would fill them. So it's not a shoe. We all know we need a shoe. We all know we need food. We want to, right? So get away from Maslow's hierarchy, right? And get into the thing that really matters. And so what we find is all those things that we said, well, I have a right to that because of the Bill of Rights. And we fill up with all these things, right? So now we find ourselves here. And to your earlier point, when you said all those things now we don't believe in because they didn't do it, and now nothing I do seems to feel good, so I don't believe in anything. And so I'm here in this self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will, of voidness, right?
Yeah.
Getting back to before you said the flame, you used the word flame.
I did.
Right? And what I heard you say was, we have lost sight of the Promethean fire.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting because it's
Yeah.
Right?
the hubris thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
it doesn't.
That is the spark. There's the transcendence that lies deep within the promise of the Bill of Rights, of the Constitution, of this beautiful thing that had never existed before.
I know.
Right.
You're right.
And so when you sit here and say this, I think, right, we have shamefully gotten away from the divinity, if you will, of idea, of the thrill and the joy of thought, of discovery, of saying, I possess that Promethean fire by the virtue of breathing, of just being alive. That's the spark. And to take that for granted is a shame. I think the forefathers would look and say, you're just trying to buy that unquantifiable or quantified, unqualifiable thing. You've tried to merchandise it.
It's interesting because, you know, I like what you say, because there is, like very much what you say, because there is a word, I think it's also in English, it's conditioning. Conditioning has two meanings. It means conditioning like it's determinism, and it's also the industrial process to make a product, conditioning. And it's actually what we have done of ourselves, and we made even out, not even outside ourselves, we have made ourselves the product itself, which is even worse. It's not even the product that we think, oh, we are going to be happy with that, with this practice, with those and that. No, it's we became the product itself. We are conditioning ourselves as an industrial product.
And we
which
brand
is
ourselves.
completely incredible. And now to think about thought, again, another word that means to think. It's the word concept, that for me is a great word. And I think we need to come back to concepts. Concept is positive, right? But we made marketing concepts. When you talk about a concept in marketing, that's exactly the opposite of a concept in philosophy. You know? Oh, that I find a great concept for this new movie. I have the concept I need, you know? And everything is like that. Because what is lost when you were talking about the spark, it's true, is the very idea, a word that we haven't pronounced yet, of progress. Progress is transcendence. You need to believe that something will happen that you can't program. But we have a vision of progress that is actually a conditioning of progress itself as being a product, because we want to program it, because we don't believe enough in the future, because we don't believe in transcendence in itself, you know? And so I think if we want to come back to the promise of progress, because it was part of what you said, the idea of progress, we have to stop trying to program. And even ecology today is just able to program negatively what is, you know.
So unfortunately, we're on the end of our time together today. I cannot thank you enough,
No,
Raphael.
I can't. No, I thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. That's really nice. Thank you. I've been really very happy to be here. It's just, for me, it's just, I would say, really thrilling to talk to you and to share my ideas for almost the first time. I've just shared them in a conference in France 4 weeks ago, for the first time in 3 years. So I'm glad you have done that in the new world.
I haven't heard of the speakers say etymology that many times in an hour.
I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry. I can't. Sorry about that.
To close out, everybody, I just want you to be aware that our next gathering will be on a topic that's not as heavy. It'll be about
Oh,
death.
was it heavy? On what? What was it?
On death.
On death. Oh, yeah.
On May 1 with Michael Hebb, who has created the largest end-of-life organization
Wow.
in the world, over 1 million members. So it should be a really great conversation. I hope you all come back.
And Saturday, the Thai forest.
Yeah, the monks and the retreats, and we've got it all going on. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Be happy, be well.
Thank you to have been
be
here,
safe.
really.
Thank you.
That was so great.